Hey everybody, it's Patrick from 8bitdoodads.com, and I thought I would do something different today. I've been spending a lot on Corvus OmniNet and Apple Talk and other things, and so I went into my projects box and I found the FujiNet that I had ordered and I had yet to install on an Apple II. So why don't you join me in my adventure in learning how the FujiNet works?
Say, kids, what time is it?
It's 8-Bit Doodads time!
Now, the first thing I just mentioned is the FujiNet itself. As you can see here, it came with, in fact, it came with this cable and I think a couple other cables, and this interface, which is the DB19 interface, and this is the standard 20-pin floppy cable. And this was designed to plug directly into the back of an Apple IIc or into an Apple II GS that has one of these ports. But they actually made it so that you can take that off. That's one of the optionals, and you can plug a ribbon cable directly into it for an Apple IIe or an Apple II using an internal disk controller. You have to, for FujiNet, you have to have something that's smart port capable. There's a couple of ways to achieve this, and I'm talking now for an Apple IIe, which didn't have smart port or any disk controller built into it. One is, and it's my choice, I have a couple of these Yellowstone cards, which are capable of driving both standard Apple Disk 2 floppy disk drives, but also can be used with smart port capable disk drives, which this is, and we can just plug this connector right in and wire it up that way. I usually use this with the floppy emu, which can emulate both Disk 2 and SmartPort devices. And I got that out in case I need to transfer any software to get this thing working. And so with both of these, I can use one controller and have it control both the emu and the FujiNet. On an Apple II GS, it knows SmartPort to begin with, and it has that DB19 port, so you don't need anything else. You don't need a special disk card. If you have what would be the standard Disk 2 controller card, which this cable would fit on, the way you need to get that to work is you have to have an optional ROM chip that convinces the Apple II that it knows what SmartPort is. And there's several of those available. I'm not going to go down that path, but if you are looking at the FujiNet wiki, they talk about that. It's something called Soft SP or Soft SmartPort. And I'll let you dive into that. Our first job is going to be putting this into our Apple IIe. See, I have my monitor here, and the Apple's actually on at the moment. I'm going to turn it off. And the only thing in my Apple IIe is right now is the 80-column, standard 80-column extended 80-column card. Gives you an extra 64K, making this 128K machine. And I have this VGA using a Raspberry Pi Pico to give me a VGA out signal, which is how I'm capturing the output of this on the screen that you saw go dark when I turned the machine off. So we're going to plug the FujiNet in here. And there's a key on this. Try to plug it in. And I'm just going to turn it on and see what happens. And I got it did not boot from it. It's possible that nope, let me try PR number 6. I was thinking it wasn't ready when I turned the machine on. Check disk drive. All right. Now there is a reset. There was a light on. I'm going to give it a try again. And now I see more lights, and we see the FujiNet logo came up, and we have our it's booted right in. One of the things you see on the menu is a host list, and then you see SmartBoard drives and Disk2 drives. A FujiNet can emulate multiple hard drives, floppies, etc., and it can do so from an. I'll bring this over. There's a space for an SD card, and you can mount drives directly from that SD card. And in fact, I had brought out here some empty SD cards in case I had to go down that route. But you can also see, and in fact, that first choice is the SD card if there was one in there. But one of the really neat things about FujiNet is it can pull in disk images that are mounted or stored elsewhere. And in fact, their wiki goes into, and I'm going to set up, putting my own TNFS server, which is, tiny, like a tiny FTP server type thing on the Windows machine, and I can share all of my copies of disk images that I have and be able to mount those directly from here to our network and home. But it can also access the internet. And it's doing that because the board in here has a Wi-Fi chip, and it's logged on to my local Wi-Fi. And in fact, the people at FujiNet have made a server available with some sample images. So I can go to, and that's going out over the internet and bringing up those sites. And I can go down here to Apple II, and we can load one of their, in fact, they have a ProDOS disk. So I'm going to say we're going to load that one, and it's asking me where to put it. And it's now set that disk image. It hasn't copied it to this machine because there's no SD card in here at that time. It's actually just set in configuration, telling it where to mount it across the internet. So if we go back to the beginning, and you can see that ProDOS image is selected and mounted, I should be able to, if I press escape, since that's the only disk, it's mounting it, and it's restarting FujiNet, and hopefully it will be booting ProDOS 242. I don't see, oh, it is blinking. There we go. And it has actually now booted ProDOS across the internet. So if other people host disk images using this type of server, if you knew what their IP address or their host name is, you can get to them. When you set up one on your own, that's, as I said, one of my next steps is setting up my own server and then setting up the configuration to tell it where it is. And then all the hundreds, if not thousands of disk images I have, I could be remotely booting from and loading on this. We'll also take a look at, I'm going to put some images on one of these cards, and we'll put that in there and see how that is to work with. Okay, we're back. I've gone ahead and reclosed up my Apple. I routed the FujiNet through the cable out the back, and I went out and found some micro SD cards and the little adapter to plug into my computer, and I've loaded up one of these cards with a bunch of sample images and plugged it into the FujiNet so we have storage locally to give that a test. And in the meantime, I also set up that TNFS server, which I found out means Trusted Network File Server service. I did it on Windows. There's instruction in the FujiNet wiki that tells you how to download it, install it, and everything. And it actually is much simpler than almost any other solution I've seen. It's one executable. You put it in a directory. You make a directory of all the files you want to share. And then you just need to point the FujiNet at that. One thing I've noticed about FujiNet is you can see the screen's up and my Apple logo's up there, and it's just blinking. And this is what happens when you first turn on the machine. In fact, I'll turn it off and back on again, and you can see it came to that. And if you look at the FujiNet, now the light came on. This is on the card in slot 6. So in theory, it should be booting from that. And I think if I reset the machine, it did not boot. It might be doing. There you go, and you see it's FujiNet. I think the FujiNet does not come ready fast enough, so the drive controller doesn't see it, and so it just thinks there's no disk drive there, and that's why you get the prompt. And so you have to reboot a couple times. Now we have the screen up here. You can see that SD card is in the top slot, so we'll give that a return, and you can see the disk images I've loaded up on here. Microsoft Multiplan. So if I want to take that, I can put that into that drive slot, and it goes back and allows you to pick another disk. So this can be a great way of moving stuff onto your PC if in this Apple I had a hard drive installed, or one of the hard drive emulators, a CFFA or a microdrive turbo or a booty. In essence, the FujiNet does the work of one of these, which is a floppy emu, which emulates floppy drives or smart port devices, which the FujiNet does, and supports a local SD card. In fact, I could take this SD card out of the emu and plug it in there because the disk format, which is FAT32, is the same both, and you're using standard Apple to disk images. So FujiNet can replace the emu, and in fact it does much more than that, because not only can it read from that SD card, it can read from a server. As I said, I've actually gone and set up a TNFS server on my local network, which is the 1010 network. And so if I click on this, I can now mount a drive that's actually being hosted on my Windows PC. I'm assuming it's going to open it. Okay, it turns out that my Windows machine had done an update last night, and when it rebooted, for some reason I got a different IP address on my network, so I have set that up now. And now you can see when I click on that, we instantly get a directory listing of the images that are hosted locally. And there's no limit to these, and I believe you can have subdirectories and everything else, so it's a great way to host on your machine literally all your disk image files, so that if you ever need to get to one, you could do it easily from this screen. Now, once you plop in your settings, you can continue out of this boot menu. The reason this configuration came up was because there were no drives mapped or anything, so it presented this to you. Once you then escape and boot, it goes and mounts that floppy image that you selected, and it's loading that piece of software. And there are some indicator lights on the and this is a 2-disc set, so obviously I don't have that. There are some indicator lights on the FujiNet letting you know it's reading and writing from that. Now, this particular image we mounted from the SD card. If we wanted to mount an image from the network, we can do that. From the Apple standpoint, it doesn't see anything different. It's just seeing a floppy drive or a smart port device hanging off the back of it. Beyond what the floppy emu can do, as I said, for all these disk actions, it very much is looking like this. The difference being is instead of having an LCD and some buttons to change disks, you have that menu interface. But since the people who developed this and the firmware they put on there, they didn't stop at just emulating disk drives. They actually have set it up for some additional what's called a smart port character device, one of which is a printer, and one of which is a modem, and they've actually added some programming that you can use within BASIC, so you can do some multi-user games and sending commands back and forth from your Apple to, say, a server that multiple people are talking to, and they've got, I believe, a demo of people playing Texas Hold'em, where it's one deck of cards being shuffled between multiple machines, and it's all coming across on the FujiNet. One thing I just want to show you real quick, if I was to reboot this machine again, it still remembers that mapping, and it's just like whatever disks are inserted, it's just going to keep rebooting those same setups that you've already picked from the menu. If I hit the reset key, and I got to make sure I hit the right one, and then reboot, it should go back. We should get the FujiNet logo, and it will go back to that menu to allow me to make other changes. But once you've made the changes and say boot, then the booting just deals with whatever the smart port devices and the disk2 devices that you have mapped. One other thing is we hit the C key for config. You can see it has my Wi-Fi network, what the IP address is, and everything else. And we can actually change the Wi-Fi network if we want to map to a different one in the house. And we can go back to the house. Now, that's how I want to show you on the PC with FujiNet right at the moment. I'm going to change, and I want to show you something on the Windows machine that I find really enhances the functionality of the FujiNet. I'm going to leave the FujiNet running as you see it on the screen here, and I'm going to bring up a web browser in our recording so you can see what it's like to look from the PC to the FujiNet. Okay, this last little bit I thought was one of the coolest parts of FujiNet is that not only can FujiNet read from the internet and download disk images, and I should say not just read and write. You can set up images to be read write or read only. Now, different people's TNFS servers might be set to read only, so even if you on the local machine say read write, you won't have permission to do that. But you can read and write to your local machines. You can go the other direction. You can go from your Windows PC, as you see I have a web browser up, that is talking to the FujiNet. And in fact, if I go back here on my Apple II and bring up the configuration data, if you look at that first window in the FujiNet browser, you will see the same IP settings. It's talking to this machine. But more importantly, you can use this web browser to change the settings of the FujiNet. Now, obviously, changing the machine name or its IP address might be interesting. Obviously, you have to reconnect after you do that. But the real value is in the other windows where you can turn on and off the printer support or the modem support. But more importantly, you can change the mount list over here. So what's in a particular slot, if you want to change what's mounted on the machine, and I'm going to go back to the window so you can see right now Multiplan's the only one mounted. If I go to a host, well, there's the SD card. Oh, sorry, I'm clicking on the recorder window. I can bring up here, and you can see it's showing me the list of disks, and I'll click on BeagleBag, and it's asking me where to put it, and whether I want it to be read-only or read-write, we were just talking about. And I'll put it in that slot, and now when we come back up, you can see those two disks, Multiplan and BeagleBag are there. Now, I'm going to see if going to config and coming back, you'll notice on the Apple II, it's now mounted that disk. Obviously, the Apple II doesn't have that Windows concept of refreshing behind the scenes, so you sort of have to force refresh the screen to see the changes if you're making them both on the PC and on the Apple II. Why this could be really nice is you've got disks mounted on here. Let's say you're installing AppleWorks and it has multiple program disks. You could either mount each of the disks in a different drive, or you would mount the first disk into the drive you're installing from, copy all the files over to your hard drive or your hard drive emulator, and then using the web interface, you could actually swap what disk is mounted in that drive, and effectively giving you what the menu buttons on a floppy emu do on this LCD. You could be doing those, controlling the actions of the FujiNet from your web browser. So I thought that was really interesting feature. Performance-wise, do understand that even if you mount hard drive images on here, the physical interface from the device to the computer is through a floppy port. And that's the same thing with a floppy emu. So they're great for moving data back and forth, but using this as a emulated hard drive, it can be painfully slow because you're basically all the access is being done at floppy speeds, the transferring of the bits, and there's not a lot you can do to speed that up because that's the physical interface. But it is great for moving stuff back and forth. I think in a future video I want to come back and look at some of those multiplayer games and demos and what you could write yourself to use FujiNet. I believe people are working on chats and being able to send messages back and forth. I know you can send tokens back and forth, which is the facility by which they play the games and the dealing goes on. The cards get sent back and forth. So look forward to that. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up, and we'd love you to subscribe so you can be told about new videos that are coming out. And also visit us on our webpage, 8bitdoodads.com.